You ever scroll through listings, see a half-rotted bungalow listed for $900,000 and just laugh? Like, what are we doing here? Because for most Canadians, the dream of owning a home doesn't even feel like a dream anymore. It feels like a joke. You work full-time, maybe even 2 jobs. You do everything you're told. Go to school, save, stay out of debt, invest a bit. And yet, the goalpost keeps moving. Every year, housing prices rise faster than wages, and every time you think you're catching up, the down payment doubles. And you start thinking, maybe this just isn't for people like me anymore. But here's the truth. The system is stacked against us. Yes. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. There are still ways to own, to build equity, and to create something that's actually yours. It just doesn't look like what your parents did. Today, I'm going to break down why Canadians feel they'll never own a home and how we can still make it happen, using creative, realistic strategies that actually fit today's world. Let's be real. Housing affordability in Canada is broken. The numbers back it up, but the feeling hits harder. Owning a home used to mean stability. It meant adulthood. It meant progress. Now, it feels like standing outside in the cold looking through a window at a party you weren't invited to. In cities like Toronto or Vancouver, the average detached home is well over $1 million. Even in smaller markets, Barrie, Kingston, Kelowna, the median home price has climbed so far beyond average wages that it's practically unreachable. But it's not just about prices, it's about psychology. We grew up being told that homeownership was the cornerstone of success. And now it feels like that cornerstone was pulled out from under us. So what happens? People stop believing it's possible. You start telling yourself stories like, maybe I'll just rent forever. Maybe I'll move out of the country. Maybe owning a home just isn't meant for my generation. That's the mental barrier. And it's dangerous, because when you stop believing it's possible, you stop planning for it altogether. Now let's look at the numbers behind the frustration. First, wages haven't kept up with housing. Over the past 2 decades, home prices have gone up roughly 300% in many Canadian cities. But wages have risen only around 50 to 60%. That means every dollar you earn buys you less home every year. Second, interest rates. For years, Canadians got used to ultra-low rates. 1%, 2%, 3%. People could afford higher prices because the cost of borrowing was so cheap. Then 2022 hit, and suddenly the Bank of Canada said, "We're done with that." Rates tripled, mortgage renewals doubled, and overnight, affordability collapsed. Third, supply. We simply don't build enough homes. Period. Whether it's zoning laws, lack of skilled trades, or bureaucratic red tape, Canada builds slower than almost any other G7 country. Even when there's demand, there's nowhere to go. And finally, speculation. Investors, REITs, and flippers have turned housing into an asset class instead of a basic need. When owning a home becomes a stock market game, regular Canadians lose. So, yes, the frustration is justified. But the solution isn't to give up. It's to redefine what owning a home actually means in 2025. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Owning a home doesn't have to mean a detached house with a white picket fence and a 2-car garage. That's the 1980s definition. Today's version is different, and that's okay. The future of ownership in Canada is about creative housing. Smaller spaces, smarter designs, and flexible financing. If you're willing to step outside the traditional box, there are still real paths to ownership. Let's go through a few of them. The new avenues to own in Canada. Let's start with one of my favorites, tiny homes. A typical tiny home in Canada costs anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000, depending on how fancy you get. That's about 10 to 15% of the cost of a typical starter home in most provinces. Tiny homes let you live mortgage-free or with very low monthly payments. They're energy efficient, customizable, and can be placed on land you rent, lease, or eventually buy. And here's the secret most people don't realize. You don't always need to own land to start. You can rent space on rural property, RV lots, or partner with family who already own land. In many municipalities, secondary dwellings like tiny homes are now allowed under new zoning rules. The point is, you can start smaller without staying small forever. A tiny home can be step one, not the final step. Think of it like this. You could spend $2,000 a month renting a condo. Or you could own a tiny home, build equity, and invest that same money into your future. It's not for everyone, but it's proof that there are still doors open if you're willing to look through new ones. Another major opportunity is modular housing. These aren't the mobile homes of the past. Modern modular or prefabricated homes are high quality, energy efficient, and built faster, often in half the time and half the cost of traditional construction. You can buy a 2-bedroom modular home for around $250,000 to $350,000, depending on where you build. Because they're assembled in a factory, there's less waste, fewer delays, and tighter cost control, something our housing market desperately needs. Plus, modular homes are eligible for standard mortgages and CMHC insurance in many cases. That means you can finance them like any other house, just smarter. And because they're customizable, you can expand later. Add modules, new rooms, or even stack vertically. It's flexible, affordable, and modern. So, if you've been feeling like you'll never own because traditional construction is too expensive, you're right. But that's not the only way to build a home in 2025. Now let's talk about something more collaborative. Co-ownership. This is where two or more people, friends, family, or even strangers, buy a property together and split both the cost and the equity. It's not new, but it's becoming more mainstream. Co-ownership can be a smart entry point because it lowers your upfront cost and spreads risk. Instead of needing $100,000 for a down payment, maybe you only need $50,000. Instead of covering the full mortgage alone, you split it and build equity together. There are even co-ownership platforms now that help Canadians match with others in the same situation. People who want to own can afford half, but can't do it alone. If the idea of owning with someone else feels strange, think about it this way. You already share costs with landlords, roommates, or investors. Why not share in the ownership too? Because 50% of a home is still infinitely better than 0%. Another avenue worth considering is rent-to-own or shared equity programs. These aren't perfect, and there are scams out there. But legitimate programs can bridge the gap between renting and owning. The idea is simple. Part of your rent goes toward a future down payment. You lock in a purchase price today, build credit, and eventually take ownership. Some credit unions, local developers, and municipalities offer variations of this. And while it's not as glamorous as getting pre-approved and moving in tomorrow, it's a path forward. And that's what matters. You can also look into shared equity mortgages, where the government or another investor contributes part of your down payment in exchange for a small share of your future home value. It's a trade-off, yes, but it can mean the difference between can't buy and just bought. Here's the most important part of this whole conversation. The biggest barrier to homeownership in Canada right now isn't just money. It's mindset. We've been conditioned to believe that if we can't afford a 3-bedroom detached house in the city, we've failed. But that's not true anymore. Owning something smaller, modular, or shared isn't less than. It's progress. It's control. It's a step toward financial independence in a world that's making that harder every year. And once you start to think that way, that ownership can be flexible, everything changes. You stop waiting for the perfect time or the perfect home and start building what you can right now. That's what wealth really is. Not waiting for perfect conditions, but moving when everyone else is standing still. Here's what I want every Canadian watching this to remember. The system isn't built to make it easy for you, but you can still find your way through it. There are cracks in the wall. Tiny homes, modular homes, co-ownership, shared equity. They're not gimmicks, they're strategies. You can sit around complaining that it's impossible, or you can get creative, build differently, and start small. Because owning something, Even a piece of land, even a tiny modular home, is better than waiting for a market that may never come back down. And the sooner you start, the more options you'll have. Because here's the truth, the dream isn't dead. It's just changing shape. You can still own a home in Canada. You just have to be bold enough to build it your way. If this hit home for you, no pun intended, share it with someone who needs a bit of hope right now. Because we're all feeling it. But if we start thinking differently, maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild this dream together. I'm the Maple Mentor, reminding you that in Canada, the climb is tough, but it's still worth it.